Alright, welcome Theater 224 Production Technology. Today we're going to be talking about rigging. Sorry, I know this isn't the most ideal way to do it, but this is what we've got, so please bear with me and hopefully we get you through everything that you need to know. Again, if there's any questions, go ahead and email me, ask through Blackboard or email, doesn't matter. I'll do my best to respond and clear up anything we can. So, first thing we want to talk about with rigging is you never want to do it unless you are sure of what you're doing. This is one of those areas that can be very harmful and things can literally fall out of the sky if you do it wrong. So make sure that this is something you are comfortable with before you go ahead and do it. That being said, we're going to talk about some of the most commonly used items in the theater, and we'll go from there. Here I've got a couple examples of wire rope. These are very common in the theater. This in particular is 1/8 inch, and this is called galvanized aircraft cable. Some people call it GAC, G-A-C, galvanized aircraft cable. They call it this because that is the industry that it comes from. It started to be used in airplanes, and this is literally how they held the wings on. You'd have these cables going and making some big X's, things like that, and that is what stabilized the wings as they would fly. This one in particular is called a 7x19. Let's see if it will focus. Probably not. How about you? Will you focus on this? It's a lot better. So you can see from the 7x19 is the type of aircraft cable this is. And that is because you have 7 strands here. You've got 6 going around the outside with 1 down the center. And each one of these strands has 19 little strings within it. So that is why this is also called 7x19 aircraft cable. As you can see, especially on this piece here, I've got some ends that are frayed out pretty seriously. And that totally sucks because they're super, super thin, just like needle thin. And if you're not careful, you will get stabbed by them. So that is something you want to watch out for whenever you're using this stuff, because it will get you and you will know it and you will be upset. So with this, a couple things that we can do. I'm going to use this short piece here to show you. As you can see, I've got this piece of wire rope, but by itself can't really do a whole lot with it. There's no way to hang something with this. I don't have a way to pull on it and hang on to it as we're operating. So we need to do something about that. We've got a couple options, but what we're talking about here is how to terminate the end. That is to finish it off, give me something useful to use. So couple things here. The first one we're going to talk about are wire rope clips. So these right here, as you can see, they just look like this weird little piece of hardware, but they've got a couple pieces to them. And if we take this one apart here, I can show you what those pieces are. We have the U-bolt is where we're going to start, and that's because it is exactly what it sounds like. It is a U-bolt. The next piece we're going to talk about is the saddle, and that's just what they call it. And then with that, we also have the 2 nuts that lock the U-bolt to the saddle. So now we're going to talk about how this will all go together. The first part of this is we need to talk about what we're calling different parts of this wire rope. So within this system here, we're going to have our live end. This end is going to go up and away, up to a catwalk, something like that. And then we're going to have our dead end over here. We're going to call it this because it doesn't take any weight. So as you're looking at the system, we're going to put a loop here, and this is what we're working on doing, is you've got this loop. And this is what we'll be able to attach to at that point. So we've got our loop, we've got our live end, it's going up to a catwalk, and then our dead end, which is just this little guy hanging out over here. It's important to know these terms, because as we're talking about this, the one thing you want to know about wire rope clips is you never saddle a dead horse. Please remember that. You never saddle a dead horse. So with this, we're going to start putting these together, which is actually quite simple. First thing you want to know about is a thimble. You can also call it a teardrop. But we're going to put a thimble into our system here because wire rope is very strong but also very delicate. So what we're looking out for here is, say I put this into a system here and I start pulling on this. Where are you? There you go. So if I start pulling on this, if I pulled tight enough, this wire rope would kink. When things kink, they tend to break wires on the inside, and then you lose some strength from this, which is what we want to avoid. So by putting a thimble in here on this, we have something that keeps this from going beyond its minimum bend diameter. Meaning, as this wraps around here, you can see this wire rope is going to follow this teardrop, and it is never going to bend beyond this radius here. And that's going to prevent it from kinking. So now, easiest way to go about installing this is I'm going to put 2 of these wire rope clips on the line first. These wire rope clips are specifically designated for 1/8 inch wire rope, which is also important because that is the size wire rope we're using, and we don't want to use something like this guy here. As you can tell, it's much bigger than that 1/8 inch one. Because it's made for probably 3/16. I'd have to check it. But by using something oversized like this, it's not going to get the grip that it needs. So, using the proper sizes, I've got these on here ready to go. And then I'm going to go ahead, bend this end around here, and then feed my dead end through. And of course it's jumping around on me here. So we're going to try that again. I'm going to feed that first clip through, feed the second clip through, and now, before I go too much further, I'm going to go ahead and put my thimble in and scoot the wire rope clip down near the thimble. With that done, I'm going to start to tighten these up. They're putting up a fight on this guy. And that's okay. Just going to go and put some of that back in. Make sure to pull that tight. Now that I've got one started, it's going to hold all of that in place for me. So what you're looking at here is I've got the U onto my dead end here, and the saddle is on my live end that's going to go up to some sort of rigging. So this is what I mean by never saddling a dead horse, because the saddle goes on the live end and not the dead end. So when using wire rope clips, you always need to use a minimum of 2, but depending on the size of wire rope, you might need 4 or 5 or even more. It just depends on how big you're going, but for 1/8 inch, 2 is enough. So I'm going to go through and get these nice and tight. And you want these pretty snug, but I don't want to go so tight, especially with like a wrench, because I'll end up stripping these out and then they're going to lose their grip. But right here, I've got a system that is ready to hold onto items as we pick them up in the air. You can see these clips. I've got one nice and close to the thimble. Now I'm about a hand width apart before I put the next one on. So from here, I can take something like a shackle and get that attached in with this, and then this is ready to lift. So this will be the first method of terminating some 1/8 inch wire rope. There's some upsides and some downsides to this. The first one being, it is quick and easy to use. It's got some fairly cheap tools to go with it. And everything in the system is reusable. Once I'm done, I can just go and take this apart. And I've got my wire rope clips and my thimble and my wire, and they're all ready to go. And I can reuse them. The downside to this, and this is why it is so important to never saddle a dead horse, is after I get this apart, I can show you that as a part of this system, how it makes sure that this doesn't go anywhere, is it actually kinks that wire rope. So let's see if you can see it down here. Yep. So see how it added this kink right here and up here? Once it's doing that, it is actually breaking some of the wires inside of this. But as it goes around, that's on the dead end, and everything here on my live end is still intact, and that is what's picking up all the weight. So by putting the U-bolt on the dead end and crimping over here, even though it's probably broken some wires inside of there, that's not on the lifting side. So we have not degraded our lifting capacity of this wire rope at all. But the downside to this is I now have these kinks, so before I could reuse this wire rope, I would have to cut that part out so that I don't have these system weaknesses in there. So now, the next method of terminating some wire rope is called a swage fitting, and that is going to be this guy right here. And there's some special tools to this, and a few factors that we need to consider. So for this, I'm going to terminate an end here so you guys can see how it's done. Sorry if you're wearing headphones for that. So, as you can see, I've got a few funky bends and some kinks in here. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get this out of here. For that, I've got some nice big cutters. These cutters are designed specifically for wire rope and should only be used on wire rope. Anything else, and we're probably going to tear up those cutting blades, and they will be no good. This is just like sewing scissors, only used for fabric. We do this because it's important that they stay nice and sharp, so as we make the cuts, we have a nice clean end. So as I make this cut here, watch your ears. You can see it was a pretty simple, easy cut to make, and I'm left with a very nice, clean end. That is important for what we're getting ready to do. So, just like with the wire rope clips, we want to use a thimble. But unlike the wire rope clips, I'm only going to need one of these to do this whole system. So I'm going to start, let's see if you can see that shape. This is called an oval sleeve. It's called an oval sleeve because that's pretty much exactly what it is. With this, you've got some really nice gauges that will tell you a lot about this whole setup. This one is kind of my favorite because of all the great things that it does. But you can see this is the ZFX O gauge. The common term for these is a no-go gauge because we're going to use this to measure the crimps after we've made this to make sure that our system or that all these crimps are tight enough to hold the wire rope. But this gauge also has a lot of great features. Right here are the holes in the middle that tell you your wire rope size. So as you can see, this fits pretty nicely through my M slot, which is also 1/8 inch. I hope you guys can see this. Is this one any better? Yeah, that one's better. So I'm going through 1/8 inch, which is also M, 1/8 inch. So I can do the same with my oval sleeves, is I can start to fit them right where they go. So see how I've got everything sized up for the system that, or for the diameter wire rope that I'm using. That's really important that everything is for the same size wire rope. This M seems a little silly, but that M is the size of this crimp, which also happens to be very difficultly labeled on our crimpers. I don't know if you can see that at all. So here's what we're going to do for this, is we want to slide the wire rope through our oval and then back through it. This is what I've got so far. From here, I'm going to put in my teardrop. Come on. And pull a lot of extra through on my live end. From here, I have a little bit of a tail sticking out on my dead end. I want that to be roughly 3 diameters of my wire rope. So if I were to turn this over here, I've got 1, I've got 2, I've got 3. That's roughly what we're looking for here. So now, with this all set up, I'm going to open up my crimpers, and I want to get that as closely aligned to the front of this as I can. But with that, I do not want it to be overlapping with the jaws. I need to have a little bit of an overhang. So now that I've got this all set up, I'm holding everything on the back end, making sure it's nice and tight. Now I'm just going to pull down on these crimpers, and then I'm going to open them back up. That was the hard part. So I now have 1 crimp made. See how I still have just a little bit of a lip right here at the top. And now this is enough to keep everything held together for me so my next crimps are not so difficult. But I want to go through and I want to do 2 more crimps. So to do that, I'm going to line it back up in my crimpers. And then I have just a little bit sticking out here. And it's good to take enough time here to keep everything aligned the way that it needs to be. Once I'm happy with that placement, then I just go through, make that other crimp, and now I'm going to go through and do 1 more. That last one I probably could have gone a little closer together. That wasn't terrible. Yeah, not bad. So, I now have this all crimped together. And I've got 3 separate crimps. This is important. I do not want these crimps to overlap one another at all. They need to have that spacing there. And now, let's see. Yeah, you guys can see it here pretty alright. So, focus. Probably not, but you guys can see what's happening. So I've got 1, 2, 3 different crimps, and I've got some space in between, and I still have a little bit of a lip at the front and back. So, the recommended way to do these that I do not agree with is they want you to go ahead and crimp this middle one first. Which is a problem for a lot of reasons. As you can see, I have almost no space on either the front or back. Which means if I did not put the center one perfectly in the center, I'm going to run out of room to do this guy or this guy. The other trick here, if I get another one of these out, is as you crimp, all of this is going to push and squeeze this material, and it expands out a little bit. So you can see the size difference. Come on. From one of these to the other. So I've gained about 3/16 of an inch. That's how much bigger it is. So if I start here in the middle, it's going to push out this way and this way a little bit, meaning I'm pushing this side out into my thimble. It's going to start to interfere with my crimps and I'm going to lose some strength. So by starting up here at the thimble, I can maintain my spacing and I can ensure that I'm not running too tight on any given area. So that's why it's important that we're going to start up here at the top and work our way down, because it's just going to keep pressing this out and expanding it all the way down as we go. So now, the important part, after I have made these crimps, I need to come back in with my no-go gauge and make sure that everything is crimped to the proper specification. To do that, I'm going to simply just slide this into the M slot, and as long as it fits all the way around, we're good. And you can see with this, it's a nice tight fit. There's not a whole lot of play. If I move this up a slot, see how I wiggles a little too much there? That means I might have over crimped this and put too much strain on this, and it's no longer doing what I need it to do. But also, if it does not go into the slot, like right here, it's not making its way in there, which means it's not crimped tight enough, which means it's not hanging on to the wire rope and things can slip out. That's why it's important to make sure it fits nice and tight in the corresponding slot. With this, I also have a little bit of a tail sticking out. That is also important. You can put some E-tape over this if you want, but you gotta have some sort of tail because I want to be able to see that tail. If I do not see that and it's slipped down into my swage fitting, that means that this wire might be slipping through and it doesn't have all the hold it needs and things might fall out of the sky. So this would be a swage fitting, also called a Nyco press fitting. Nyco press because that is a major brand name, just like Kleenex is a facial tissue. A lot of people will call these Nyco or Nyco press fittings or swage fittings, or compression fitting is the other term because they are compressed down as you make them. So the upsides to these are they're clearly pretty easy to use, they're pretty cheap, and I only need one of them, so I have a much cleaner terminated end than when I had the two Crosby clips. The downside to them is they are a one-time use item. Once I have crimped this, I'm never going to use it again. Also with that, because of how tight you want to get this to your thimble, unless you are super dedicated to trying to get this out, you're probably not saving a thimble when you're using the system and you want to try to reuse some of this. I'm probably going to clip it right here and start over with this, and then everything from here out is just dead. It's not going to be used again. But thimbles are also pretty cheap. They're like 13 cents or something like that. So it's not the end of the world that I cannot get this back. The other downside is the crimpers. They're a fairly hefty investment to start in with crimping. These are usually around $300 to get started. So not the cheapest thing ever, but once you have them, you will use them forever, and they will be wonderful, and all of your cables will look so much better. These do require a little bit of maintenance and care. As you can see, I've got this little adjustment knob here that can actually adjust how tight all of these crimp. That's important because if these are not crimping tight enough for my sleeve to go into the no-go gauge, I can go through and tighten that up, and that'll tighten up the jaws so I can recalibrate my crimpers to be what they need to be. That is something to pay attention to, and that's an easy way to adjust your crimps if they're too tight or too loose. But once you've got them going, they give you a really nice result. I would use these whenever possible, and these do not lower the load rating of the cable. So that is going to be crimping wire rope.